I always thought of my life as pretty normal. Just me, my studies, and a quiet house tucked in a sleepy suburban neighborhood where nothing really ever changed. Our routines were simple, predictable. My mom worked long hours, always traveling for business. I was 19, home for the summer between my first and second year of college, hoping for a quiet break before life picked up again. The only other person in the house was Aaron, an old family friend. He'd known my parents since their college days and had been staying with us for a few months while dealing with a rough patch in his life. He was around a lot, helping out around the house, fixing broken things, cooking the occasional meal. He wasn't related, but he might as well have been part of the furniture. Always there, but never too close. We weren't especially tight. Aaron was calm, quiet, a bit hard to read. We exchanged polite conversation, but it wasn't like we hung out. That changed the summer my mom went overseas for a work trip, leaving me and Aaron alone in the house for 2 weeks. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured we'd keep to our own routines. He'd stay downstairs watching documentaries or fixing things in the garage, and I'd stay upstairs, binging shows, gaming, or sleeping in too late. But by the end of the first week, I noticed a shift, a subtle one, but it was there. One Saturday evening, Aaron made dinner. I was a little surprised. Usually just ordered takeout or made something quick. But he had cooked pasta, even lit a candle on the table like we were guests at a restaurant. It caught me off guard. "How's everything going?" he asked during dinner, twirling his fork. I glanced up. Same as always. I replied, shrugging, "Just quiet without Mom, I guess." He smiled faintly. "It's nice having you around. We don't talk as much anymore." I nodded, not sure how to respond. It wasn't that he was being weird, at least not yet, but something in his tone felt too intentional, too thoughtful. After dinner, he suggested we watch a movie together. I hesitated. We hadn't done that in years. But it felt rude to say no, so I agreed. We settled into the living room. The lights were dim, the only glow coming from the TV. He sat next to me, closer than I expected, but not close enough to call it out. At first, I tried to focus on the movie, but I found myself growing hyper-aware of the space between us, or lack of it. Eventually, I felt his arm stretch across the back of the couch. I shifted, unsure. Was I imagining things? Was he just trying to get comfortable? Then came the part one couldn't explain away. His hand brushed lightly against my shoulder. Not firm, not obvious, but deliberate, and it lingered. I didn't say anything at first. I froze. I told myself maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But my chest tightened. The room didn't feel the same anymore. It felt off, unfamiliar. "Aaron," I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. He leaned in slightly. "Yeah." I stood up. "I think I'm just going to head to bed. Long day." He blinked once, then nodded. "Sure. Sleep well." I walked upstairs and shut my door, locking it behind me, something I hadn't done in years. My thoughts raced all night. I couldn't shake the feeling that a line had been approached, maybe even crossed. The next few days, I barely left my room unless I had to. Aaron kept his distance, and I was thankful for that. When my mom came home, I didn't say anything right away. Part of me was unsure how to even bring it up. I didn't want to blow things out of proportion. Didn't want her to overreact. But the discomfort inside me hadn't gone away, it had grown. One evening, I finally told her. Not everything, not in detail, but enough to make her understand that I was uncomfortable being alone in the house with him. She went quiet. No anger, no panic. Just a long pause, and then she nodded. 2 days later, Aaron was gone. He didn't say much when he left, just a polite thank you and a quiet goodbye. After that, the house felt different again. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, safe. That summer changed me. Not because of what happened, but because of what I realized about myself. About how important it is to listen to your instincts. To trust a voice inside that says, "This isn't right." And most importantly, to speak up even when it's hard. I still think back on those quiet nights sometimes. Not with fear, but with clarity. That moment was a turning point, and I'm proud of how I handled it. Sometimes, Growing up isn't about the big, dramatic moments. It's about the subtle ones, the ones where you choose to stand up, walk away, and protect your peace. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to figure out if I was reading too much into it, or if something real, something strange, had crossed an invisible line between us. I started to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Jamie's hand was still on my arm. His touch was slow and deliberate, not rushed or careless. His fingers brushed down to my elbow, warm against my skin. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, like my body was reacting before my mind could fully process what it meant. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to ask him what was going on, but I was frozen in place. My voice, my strength, my thoughts, everything had gone quiet. "It's okay," Jamie said softly, barely above a whisper. The sound of the television in the background felt distant, like background noise in a dream. "We're just spending time together. That's all." But it didn't feel like that. Not anymore. Something about the air, the silence, the way he looked at me. It all felt different. I couldn't sit there another second. "I think I'm going to head to bed," I said, suddenly standing, my voice tight and uneven. Jamie looked up at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might stop me or ask me to stay, but he didn't. He simply gave a small nod, his eyes calm but watchful. "Good night," he said, his voice quiet and strangely soft. I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked quickly up the stairs, my pulse thudding my ears like a drum. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I laid in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the soft of the fan, doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. My thoughts were a tangled mess, flashes of memory, of looks that lingered too long, of the gentle way his fingers had brushed my skin. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that it was just the closeness of summer, of being alone in this house with someone I trusted, that maybe I was misreading everything. But deep down, I knew something had shifted between us. Something unspoken had surfaced, and I didn't know how to deal with it. The morning after was a blur. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not wanting to run into Jamie in the kitchen. But eventually, hunger got the better of me. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on a hoodie, and padded downstairs with heavy steps. The kitchen was bright. Sunlight spilled into the windows, glinting off the countertops and making the room feel warmer than it should have. Normally, that light would make everything seem calm and ordinary, but not today. I peeked around the corner. Empty. For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe he'd gone out. Maybe I wouldn't have to talk to him. Not yet. I poured myself a bowl of cereal and sat down, trying to pretend like everything was fine. But then I heard the creak of floorboards in the hallway, and I stiffened. Jamie walked in, freshly showered and dressed in a faded gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked normal, calm, like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said, offering me a small smile as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "Morning," I replied, barely glancing up, my eyes fixed on the swirl of cereal in my bowl. I could feel him watching me. The silence between us grew louder with every second. "You seemed a little tense last night," Jamie said, his voice casual, but not casual enough. There was a subtle edge to it, like he was fishing for something beneath the surface. "Yeah," I replied, swallowing hard. "I was just tired." "It's nothing." He nodded, but I could see in his eyes. He didn't believe me. He took a sip of his coffee and sat across from me, resting one arm on the table. I could feel the weight of his presence, even without looking up. The silence dragged on. "We don't have to make this awkward, you know," he said eventually, his tone gentle. "You and me, we've known each other a long time. We should be able to talk about anything." I finally looked at him. His gaze was steady, calm, too calm. There was something in it that I couldn't quite read. Not concern. Not exactly. More like careful curiosity. "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," he replied, his voice soft. "Not until you're ready." He reached across the table and brushed his fingers against mine, barely a touch. I pulled my hand back instinctively. The contact, Even that small sent a jolt of confusion through me. Not fear, not anger, just something I didn't know how to name. "I think I'm going to go for a walk," I said, grabbing my phone and standing abruptly. Jamie didn't stop me. He just nodded. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "I'll be here." I stepped outside, the morning air cool against my flushed skin. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The quiet of the street wrapped around me as I walked, my thoughts running faster than my feet. What was I doing? What was happening? I walked aimlessly for nearly an hour. The neighborhood was still and peaceful, birds chirping, sprinklers hissing on manicured lawns. Everything looked the same, but I felt completely different. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending my summer. I thought I'd be relaxing, maybe taking on a few side gigs, catching up on some reading. I didn't expect to be this confused, this unsteady. Jamie had always been there, more like a mentor than a friend, someone close to my family for years. He had offered me a place to stay when things at home had gotten too loud, too complicated. I had trusted him, still did, in some strange way, but that trust felt more fragile now. Later that day, I came home to find Jamie in the backyard, working on the garden. He glanced up as I passed through the kitchen and waved, but didn't say anything. I gave a small wave back before disappearing upstairs. That night, he made dinner. Chicken stir-fry and rice, one of his favorites. I sat across from him, quieter than usual, picking at my food. He didn't press me with questions. Instead, we talked about small things, the weather, a new show he'd started watching, how I was thinking about changing my major again. It almost felt normal. Almost. After dinner, he stood to clear the dishes, and I surprised myself by helping. Our hands brushed once over the sink. Neither of us spoke about it. As the week went on, the tension softened but never disappeared. We didn't talk about that night. We didn't talk about how things had changed. But sometimes in the quiet moments, when we passed each other in the hallway or watched a movie side by side on the couch, I could still feel it, like something hanging in the air between us. Unsaid, unresolved, and maybe for now that was enough. Emotion surged in me like a tide I couldn't hold back. Confusion, fear, something unspoken twisting in my chest. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, a misread moment, a haze of overthinking. But deep down I knew something had shifted. Something had crossed an invisible line. I wandered the neighborhood aimlessly, letting the crisp evening air cool my skin. My hands were stuffed in my pockets, shoulders tense, eyes barely noticing where I was going. Each step was an attempt to distance myself from the strange energy at home, especially from him. I didn't want to confront it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. By the time I returned home, the sky had softened into a warm orange glow, and shadows stretched long across the pavement. I stood outside the door for a while, staring at the handle, debating whether I should go in. Eventually I did. I couldn't avoid him forever. Inside, the soft murmur of the TV floated through the air. He was in the living room again, just like before, calm, casual, flipping through channels like nothing had happened. His eyes met mine when I walked in, and he gave a small smile. "You feel better?" he asked, his tone light, almost too normal. "Yeah," I said, a quick lie tumbling from my lips. "Just needed some space." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. I didn't stay. I headed straight upstairs, shutting my door behind me like a shield. That night, I didn't leave my room. I could hear him downstairs, moving around, the rise and fall of TV dialogue, the clink of a glass on the table, but I stayed curled up on my bed, trying to sort through the noise in my head. The next few days blurred together. I did my best to avoid long conversations. I kept things polite, distant, smiled when I needed to, but every time I passed by him in the hallway or sat across from him at the breakfast table, I felt the weight of what wasn't being said. It clung to the silence like fog. Then came Friday night. Mom was still away, and the house felt even quieter than usual. I had been cooped up in my room all day, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, trying to lose myself in distractions. But nothing worked. The stillness was too loud. I needed air. I headed downstairs, hoping to step outside for a bit. But when I entered the living room, there he was, seated on the couch, a bottle of beer in hand. The room was dimly lit, the blue glow of the TV casting shadows across his face. He looked up when he saw me. There was something different in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name. Calm but charged, expectant, maybe. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Come sit for a bit?" I hesitated. Something about his tone made my heart skip. "I'm just stepping out for a minute," I replied quickly, gesturing toward the front door. But he stood up, and in that instant the room shifted. His movement wasn't threatening, not exactly, but it made my breath catch. My instincts told me to keep distance, but I didn't move. Not yet. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft, eyes searching mine. "You don't have to keep shutting me out." I blinked, trying to understand what he meant. His words hovered in the air, dense with something unspoken. "I'm not," I said quietly. "I just needed space. That's all." He stepped closer, and I felt the tension return like a wave crashing over me. He wasn't doing anything wrong, not directly, but the way he looked at me, the attention, the intensity, it made me want to crawl out of my own skin. "I just want you to know," he said, voice steady. "You can talk to me about anything. I'm here. No judgment." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thanks," I murmured, already backing away. "I mean it," he added gently. "Whatever you're going through, you're not alone." His words sounded sincere. Maybe they were. But the weight of our recent moments made it difficult to take them at face value. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. My mind felt like it was pulling me in opposite directions. "I know," I whispered. I turned away before the pressure in my chest could spill over, quickly heading back to my room and closing the door behind me with a quiet click. My hands trembled as I leaned against it, breathing hard, trying to get my heartbeat to slow. The room was still. The house was still. But inside me, everything was chaos. I couldn't forget that night. Even in the silence of my room, something inside me was screaming. Not in words, just this tight, anxious pressure that wouldn't let go. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. The image of Dad in the living room burned into my mind like a memory that refused to fade. Nothing had happened, not really, but it felt like something had. Something I didn't have the language for. Something I couldn't stop thinking about. He hadn't crossed any lines. But the weight in his eyes when he looked at me, the way the air shifted in the room when we were alone, it was too much to ignore now. I kept going over it again and again in my head. Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into looks and silences? But the tension wasn't just in my mind. I could feel it like a rope stretched too tight. And the worst part was, I didn't know what it meant, or what I was supposed to do with it. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't restful. My dreams were broken fragments. Shadows of conversations that never happened, moments stretched and distorted until they barely resembled reality. I woke up just after dawn, my heart pounding, my bed sheets twisted around me like vines. Downstairs, the house was already awake. The scent of coffee drifted through the halls, warm and familiar. I pulled on a hoodie and stepped carefully down the stairs, like each step might trigger something I wasn't ready for. In the kitchen, the morning light spilled through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. Dad stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He looked over his shoulder when he heard me, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said finally, his voice casual. Too casual. "Morning," I said, trying to match his tone, trying to sound normal. He smiled a little, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was that tension again, quiet, heavy, and lingering. It was like we were both holding our breath, pretending there wasn't a thread stretched between us, pulling tighter every time we got too close. "You sleep okay?" he asked. "Yeah." I lied, the word catching my throat. I sat down at the table, wrapping my hands around the mug he handed me. The warmth helped a little, grounding me, but it didn't settle the storm inside. I wanted to ask him what happened last night. What was that moment we shared or didn't share? Was it in my head or did he feel it too? But I didn't ask. I just looked down at my coffee, and he turned back to the stove, stirring quietly. That's how the next few days passed. Like nothing had happened, like we were still the same. But we weren't. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was full of things we weren't saying. I spent more time in my room, headphones on, trying to drown out the noise in my head. But even music couldn't help. Every time I saw him, passing in the hallway, sitting on the couch, eating dinner in the kitchen, it was there, that unspoken thing, like gravity had shifted between us. Mom called once. She said the conference was going well, and she'd be back in a few more days. Her voice was bright and cheerful, completely unaware that our home didn't feel like home anymore. I told her everything was fine. Another lie. That Friday night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. I paced around my room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Midnight, 1. I thought about sneaking out for a walk, just to clear my head, but the thought of bumping into Dad on the way out stopped me cold. Instead, I opened my window and let the cool night air in. It helped a little. The sky was clear, stars scattered like salt across velvet. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, until my legs got tired, and I sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't hear him at first. Just the creak of the stairs, the soft sound of footsteps down the hall. My door didn't open. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was there, just standing on the other side of the wall. Like me, not knowing what to say. The next morning, I found him in the garage, tinkering with the old bike he'd been meaning to fix for months. It felt like a peace offering, something quiet and neutral. I hovered in the doorway, unsure. He looked up and smiled. "You ever gonna help me with this thing, or just stand there?" I hesitated, then stepped inside. It was easier to be near him when our hands were busy. We didn't have to look at each other, didn't have to talk about anything real. We just worked in silence, passing tools back and forth, the hum of tension still there, but less sharp. At one point, our fingers brushed, reaching for the same wrench. We both froze for a second. Then he pulled back quickly, clearing his throat. "Almost got it," he mumbled. I nodded, pretending not to notice the flicker of something in his eyes. Later that day, I found myself in the backyard, lying in the grass. The sky was overcast, the wind cool against my skin. I closed my eyes and let it all wash over me. The confusion, the fear, the uncertainty. I didn't know what this was or where it was going. I just knew I didn't want to keep pretending I didn't feel it. But how do you confront something when you don't even know how to name it? That night, he knocked on my door. "Hey," he said softly. "Mind if I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful to leave space between us. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I looked at him. "So have you." He gave a small, sad smile. "Guess we're both figuring stuff out." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "It's been weird." He nodded. "Yeah, it has." There was a long silence. Then he added, "I just want to know you can talk to me about anything. I'm still your dad. That hasn't changed." His voice was steady, but his eyes searched mine for something, understanding, maybe forgiveness. I wasn't sure. I nodded slowly. "I know," and I meant it. Even if I didn't know what was happening between us, even if it scared me, I still trusted him. I still needed him. He stood up then, gave my shoulder a soft squeeze. "Try to get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's a new day." I watched him leave, the door clicking softly shut behind him. I didn't know if things would get better, or what better even meant anymore. But for the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. I watched Mom sitting there, quiet and still, the weight of everything settling over us like a heavy fog. Her eyes were distant, as if she was somewhere far away, somewhere I couldn't reach. Maybe she was trying to figure out how to carry all this pain, how to hold on to hope when everything felt so broken. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a fragile thread, trying to stitch us back together. "We'll get through this," she said, though even she didn't sound certain. Her words trembled, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as me. We have to. I wanted so badly to believe her, to feel that same thread of hope that she was grasping onto, even if it was just a thin one. But inside, I felt fragile, like a glass that had been cracked too many times. The cracks were spreading, and I wasn't sure if they could ever be fixed. Those first few days after Mom came home were like living in a dream I couldn't wake up from. She tried so hard to make everything normal. Cooking meals, asking about school, pretending like nothing had changed. But the distance between all of us was impossible to ignore. Dad barely spoke, and when he did, his words were clipped and cold. He avoided my eyes like he was afraid they might see everything I was trying to hide. The fear, the confusion, the hurt that still throbbed inside me. And me? I was caught in the middle, a storm of emotions swirling inside. Anger, sadness, fear, and desperate hope all tangled together. Mom suggested we see someone, a counselor, a professional who could help us untangle the mess we were all caught in. At first, Dad hesitated. I could see the walls go up in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched whenever she mentioned it. But after a while, he agreed. Maybe he wanted to fix things too, or maybe he just wanted the silence to stop eating him alive. Our first session was strange and awkward. We sat in a small, sunlit office, the walls lined with books and calming pictures. The counsel was kind but quiet, letting us speak in our own time. Words stuck in my throat, heavy and thick. Dad tried to explain himself, stumbling over his words, apologizing again and again, while Mom held my hand tightly, her eyes filled with worry and sadness. For the first time, I saw him not as a man who had hurt me, but as someone broken and scared too. Someone who had made terrible mistakes, but was still struggling to find his way back. And maybe that was a beginning, not of forgiveness, not yet, but of something like understanding. The weeks that followed were hard. We went to counseling regularly, sitting through long conversations that sometimes felt like we were opening wounds too raw to heal. But slowly, very slowly, things began to change. Dad started talking more about his loneliness, his mistakes, and the fear that he was losing us. Mom became stronger, a fierce protector holding us all together, even when everything felt like it might fall apart. And I was learning to speak up, to say the things I had kept inside for so long. Even though the past still haunted us, those moments I wished I could erase. There were also tiny sparks of hope, a look between Dad and me that wasn't filled with fear, a quiet conversation with Mom where I didn't feel so alone, moments where the weight lifted just enough for me to breathe without the constant ache in my chest. But healing isn't a straight path. Some days, the memories came crashing back, and the hurt was fresh again. The silence would grow heavy, and I'd find myself retreating into my room, shutting the world out. Sometimes Dad would knock softly on my door, and we'd talk, awkwardly, quietly, about nothing and everything all at once. Those moments, fragile as they were, felt like threads pulling us back together. One afternoon, I found Dad sitting on the porch, staring at the sky. The light was fading, casting long shadows across the yard. I sat beside him, not saying anything at first. After a while, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for everything." It wasn't the kind of apology I expected. No excuses, no defensiveness, just raw and simple. And it was enough to make my throat tighten. "I don't know how to fix this either," I said honestly, "but I want to try. For us." He nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling between us. And maybe that's what it all came down to, trying. Trying even when it felt impossible. Even when the past cast long shadows over every step forward. I don't know how long this road will be, or if we'll ever truly get to a place where everything is okay again. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a small, fragile hope flicker inside me. A hope that maybe, somehow, we could find a way back from the darkness. Together. Her eyes were tight with anger and hurt. For a long moment, she just stared at me, silent. Then finally, she stood up, her movement sharp and deliberate. "I'll handle it," she said quietly, her voice cold but steady. "This isn't your fault." And she did handle it. The weeks that followed were a blur. Difficult conversations, therapy sessions, Counselors trying to help us pick up the shattered pieces of our broken family. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I'd ever been through. But slowly, things began to shift. Slowly, we started to heal. Dad moved out for a while, giving us both the space we desperately needed. During that time, I focused on myself, finding my own strength, untangling the complicated feelings I've been carrying around like a weight I didn't know how to put down. I didn't know if I would ever fully forgive him. I didn't know if things would ever go back to how they were before. But one thing I knew for sure, I couldn't let this break me or define who I was. And with time, I found a way to move forward. Luckily, I did.